Most people think they'll see the warning signs when an INFJ decides to walk away. But the truth is, INFJs rarely announce their exit. They do it quietly, carefully, and in ways most people completely miss until it's too late. What starts as small shifts, shorter replies, a colder tone, or subtle distance eventually becomes the silent end of a connection you thought was unbreakable. And here's the shocking part. Once an INFJ decides you've crossed the line, there is no going back. Their silence isn't just distance, it's the final judgment. In this video, we're uncovering the 10 hidden signs an INFJ is cutting you off without saying a word. By the end, you'll understand why INFJs don't need arguments, explanations, or drama to walk away. Their silence says everything. If you've ever had an INFJ in your life, you need to watch this all the way through. And before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this is only the beginning of understanding the most mysterious personality type out there. They go quiet, their silence isn't peace, it's distance. When an INFJ starts pulling away, their silence is rarely about serenity, it's about creating space. Normally, INFJs are deeply engaged in conversations, even if they're quiet listeners. They nod, ask thoughtful questions, and give you their full presence. But when they feel hurt, disappointed, or taken for granted, that natural warmth disappears. Instead of confrontation, they choose quiet, withdrawal. This silence is different from their usual reflective pauses. It feels heavy, almost unsettling, because it's not about resting their mind. It's about protecting their energy. When they go quiet, they're building emotional distance. They no longer feel safe to share openly, so they stop giving parts of themselves. People around them might misinterpret this as moodiness or introversion kicking in, but the truth is more serious. They're beginning to detach. INFJs don't like drama, so they rarely announce that they're pulling away. They won't send warnings, ultimatums, or angry messages. Instead, they retreat into silence, letting absence do the talking. This can be incredibly painful for the other person because it feels like the connection is slipping away without explanation. The deeper meaning behind their silence is simple. They've been hurt, or they've realized the bond no longer feels authentic. Their quiet isn't about finding peace, it's about deciding if they should even stay connected at all. And once their silence stretches too long, it often signals the beginning of the end. Short, surface-level responses, the disappearing depth. When an INFJ begins to pull back, one of the clearest signs is the sudden shift in their communication style. Normally, INFJs thrive on meaningful conversations. They don't just talk about the weather or daily routines, they dive into deep topics, asking thought-provoking questions and offering insight that makes people feel seen and understood. But when they feel hurt, dismissed, or disrespected, that depth disappears. Instead of warm, thoughtful replies, you'll notice short, surface-level responses. They'll answer your questions, but only with the bare minimum, yeah, sure, or it's fine. On the outside, it may seem like nothing's wrong, but the difference in tone is unmistakable. Where there was once openness and curiosity, now there's guardedness and distance. This isn't laziness or moodiness, it's intentional. INFJs use this subtle withdrawal as a protective mechanism. By cutting back the depth, they limit how much of their emotional world you have access to. It's their way of saying, I don't trust you enough to let you in anymore, without having to declare it outright. The change can feel confusing if you're on the receiving end. You might feel like they're suddenly cold, distracted, or uninterested. In reality, they've probably been carrying silent resentment or disappointment for some time, and now their energy is too drained to invest in meaningful dialogue. What makes this stage so brutal is how quiet it is. They won't argue, they won't explain, and they won't lash out. Instead, they'll simply stop giving you the depth that made the connection feel special in the first place. And once an INFJ starts responding with surface-level energy, it's often the beginning of the end, unless the issue is addressed quickly and authentically. They avoid eye contact, pulling back the connection. For INFJs, eye contact is more than just a social habit, it's a form of emotional connection. When they look at you, they're not just seeing your face, they're reading your energy, your feelings, and even the truths you might not be saying out loud. That's why their gaze often feels intense, comforting, or deeply personal. But when an INFJ feels hurt or starts cutting someone off, one of the first things to disappear is that eye contact. They'll look away more often, keep their focus on something else, or deliberately avoid letting your eyes meet theirs. It's not about shyness or distraction, it's a conscious act of distancing. By pulling back their gaze, they're cutting the invisible thread of intimacy that once bound the relationship. This shift can feel subtle at first. You might notice them checking their phone more, looking at the ground, or engaging with others while avoiding direct eye contact with you. But the impact is powerful. Where eye contact once signaled trust, warmth, and openness, its absence now signals disconnection, guardedness, and withdrawal. INFJs do this because eye contact requires vulnerability. It's a way of letting you in. And if they no longer feel safe or respected, they won't offer it. Their eyes tell the truth, and avoiding that connection is their way of silently saying, I'm not letting you in anymore. For the person on the receiving end, this avoidance can feel unsettling. It's often interpreted as coldness, rejection, or even hidden anger, but what it really means is that the INFJ has started the process of detachment. By cutting back the eye contact, they're rehearsing emotional separation before making it final. In many cases, once an INFJ stops meeting your gaze, it's one of the clearest nonverbal signs that the relationship has shifted and that you may already be on the outside of their inner world. They withdraw into solitude, the quiet escape. When an INFJ begins cutting someone off, one of the most telling signs is their sudden pull towards solitude. On the surface, it may look like they're just busy or needing space, but in reality, it's far deeper. For INFJ, solitude is not just downtime, it's their sanctuary, their place of clarity, and often the stage where they start the process of emotional detachment. INFJs are naturally introspective, and when hurt, misunderstood, or drained, their first instinct is to step back from the noise of relationships. This withdrawal isn't done with dramatic announcements or emotional explanations. Instead, it happens quietly. Fewer texts, delayed responses, canceled plans, or simply disappearing into their inner world. It's not about punishing the other person, it's about protecting themselves from further emotional damage. To outsiders, this can feel like rejection, abandonment, or even passive aggressiveness. But for the INFJ, it's survival. When they retreat, they're gathering strength, sorting through emotions, and deciding whether the connection still has a place in their life. Their solitude becomes a shield, blocking out external expectations and giving them the space to process what went wrong. The difficult part is that INFJs rarely explain this retreat. They know their need for solitude often gets misinterpreted as coldness, and rather than defend it, they let the silence speak. In truth, their withdrawal is a test. It reveals who respects their need for space and who tries to chase guilt or control them back into connection. If respected, INFJs may return with clarity and renewed trust. But if violated, if someone pushes too hard against their boundaries, their solitude often turns into permanent separation. And that's what makes this stage so brutal. While others see just distance, the INFJ is quietly closing the door. Their withdrawal is not the end of the story, but it is the clearest sign that the story is changing and that once they've found peace in solitude, they may never come back the same way again. Their tone turns polite, not warm, courtesy as distance. One of the most subtle yet painful signs that an INFJ is silently cutting you off is the shift in their tone. Normally, INFJs are warm, empathetic, and expressive in how they speak or write. You can feel their care and sincerity in every word, but when they've been hurt or feel unappreciated, something changes. Their communication doesn't stop altogether. Instead, it becomes stripped of emotional depth. Instead of warmth, you'll notice politeness. Conversations that once carried laughter, vulnerability, or thoughtful engagement now sound transactional. Their "how are you" feels like small talk, not genuine interest. Their replies might still be kind, but the spark is gone. And if you've experienced the warmth of an INFJ before, the contrast is unmistakable. This shift isn't done to punish, it's a defense mechanism. INFJs know that pouring emotional energy into a relationship where trust has been shaken is draining and unsafe. By switching to polite, detached responses, they protect themselves while also signaling that something is wrong. To the other person, it can feel confusing, even jarring. You may wonder, why do they sound distant when everything seems fine? That's the catch. INFJs rarely announce the moment they pull back, they simply let their tone speak for them. This stage often makes people second-guess themselves. You replay conversations, sensing something off, but not being able to pinpoint it. The truth is, INFJs are already halfway out the door emotionally. Their polite tone is the middle ground between staying and leaving. It's how they maintain civility while withdrawing intimacy. And here's the brutal truth. Once their tone shifts, it's hard to reverse. INFJs don't fake warmth. If you're only getting politeness, it means their trust is already cracked. And unless there's deep repair, they won't give you that emotional closeness again. In other words, when the warmth disappears, the relationship is already changing. Politeness isn't a sign of peace. With an INFJ, it's a quiet alarm bell that their heart is no longer invested. They stop sharing their inner world, silence where intimacy once lived. When an INFJ begins silently cutting you off, one of the clearest signs is that they stop letting you into their inner world. Normally, INFJs are some of the deepest and most reflective people you'll ever meet. They share their thoughts, their struggles, their insights, and even their dreams with those they trust. Opening up isn't easy for them, but when they do, it's a sign of rare vulnerability and connection. But once that trust begins to erode, the sharing stops. Conversations that used to be filled with depth suddenly feel shallow. They'll talk about work, the weather, or practical details, but the raw honesty and inner reflections vanish. What's even harder to notice is how gradually this happens. At first, it may seem like they're just tired or distracted, but over time you realize that you no longer hear about what they truly feel or think. For the INFJ, this isn't a conscious punishment. It's a self-protective move. Sharing their inner world takes enormous energy. And if they feel you don't value it, or worse, that you might use it against them, they pull back instinctively. It's not drama, it's survival. They've learned that silence keeps their heart safe. From the outside, this shift can be deeply confusing. People often sense something's missing, but can't put their finger on it. The INFJ still shows up, still interacts, still maintains politeness, but the emotional intimacy, the very thing that made the bond special, is gone. And when an INFJ stops letting you in, it's often the beginning of the end. What makes this stage so brutal is its finality. INFJs rarely reopen the door once they've closed it. They may forgive, but rebuilding that deep trust is almost impossible. Their silence in this area is not an invitation to push harder. It's a quiet announcement that your access to their soul has been revoked. In short, when an INFJ stops sharing their inner world, you haven't just lost their words, you've lost their heart. You feel an emotional wall, the invisible barrier. When an INFJ is silently cutting you off, one of the most painful shifts you'll notice is the sudden presence of an emotional wall. Unlike anger or confrontation, this wall isn't loud. It's quiet, almost invisible, but you feel it the moment it goes up. Where there used to be openness, warmth, and genuine emotional flow, there is now a sense of distance you can't quite explain. INFJs are naturally empathetic, and they usually allow themselves to connect deeply with people they trust. But when they're hurt or disappointed, they retreat behind this protective shield. It's not about punishing you, it's about self-preservation. They know that keeping their heart exposed after it's been wounded will only cause more pain, so they withdraw their energy, often without warning. From the outside, this can feel confusing and disorienting. The INFJ might still be polite, still engage in basic conversation, and even smile, but the warmth behind their words is gone. You sense that you're talking to the surface version of them, while the deeper part has gone into hiding. This is the INFJ wall, and once it's up, it's hard to break through. What makes this even more unsettling is how subtle it is. There's no dramatic fight, no angry outburst, no clear explanation. Instead, it feels like the connection that once felt natural is now strained, like trying to reach someone through glass. You can see them, but you can't feel them anymore. For the INFJ, this wall gives them space to heal and decide whether the relationship is worth saving. For the other person, however, it often feels like rejection without reason. And here's the brutal truth. Once an INFJ builds this wall, it's often the beginning of the end. Rarely do they allow someone back in once that distance has solidified. In the end, the emotional wall is both a warning and a goodbye. It tells you that something has shifted, and if nothing changes soon, you may lose access to the depths of the INFJ for good. They mirror your energy reflection without words. When an INFJ begins silently cutting you off, one of the clearest signs is the way they start mirroring your energy back to you. Unlike most people who react impulsively or confront conflict head-on, INFJs often choose reflection as their quiet form of communication. If you've grown cold, they'll respond with coldness. If you've become distant, they'll pull away even further. And if your interactions feel shallow, they'll match that surface level without giving more. This isn't a game or manipulation, it's a protective mechanism. INFJs are highly empathetic and they naturally absorb the emotions of those around them, but when they sense that your energy no longer aligns with theirs, they stop giving extra warmth to make up for what's missing. Instead, they allow you to feel exactly what you're giving them. It's like holding up a mirror, and suddenly you're faced with your own behavior. The effect can be unsettling. You might notice conversations that once flowed easily now feel strained. Where they used to offer deep insights or emotional validation, they now give clipped responses, polite smiles, or silence. Their lack of extra effort exposes just how much energy they used to pour into the relationship. Energy you may not have realized was keeping things alive. For the INFJ, this shift is intentional but subtle. They're not trying to punish you, but rather to reclaim balance. If you've taken them for granted, their mirrored energy forces you to see the truth. Without their emotional investment, the connection feels empty. And if you don't adjust, the INFJ will see it as confirmation that the relationship isn't worth saving. In many ways, this mirroring is the INFJ's unspoken test. If you notice the change and make an effort to rebuild the bond, there's a chance to repair things. But if you ignore it or dismiss it, they take it as a sign to continue pulling back, often until there's nothing left to salvage. Ultimately, when an INFJ mirrors your energy, it's both a warning and a preview. It shows you what the relationship looks like without their empathy and depth. And for most people, that sudden emptiness becomes the wake-up call that something has gone very wrong. They start setting hard boundaries, the silent shift you can't ignore. When an INFJ reaches the stage of silently cutting you off, one of the clearest signals is the sudden presence of firm, non-negotiable boundaries. At first, you might not notice it, because INFJs typically give freely, their time, their energy, their empathy. But when they've been hurt, drained, or pushed too far, the generosity fades, and what replaces it is a quiet wall of limits. You'll hear more no's where there used to be yes. Invitations they once accepted without hesitation suddenly get declined. Conversations that once flowed freely may now end quickly with polite excuses. And when you try to push, you'll find that the INFJ no longer bends. Their boundary is firm, clear, and final. What makes this so shocking is how different it feels compared to their usual nature. INFJs are naturally empathetic and self-sacrificing, often putting others' needs above their own. So when they start drawing lines in the sand, it's not casual. It's because they've reached a breaking point. Setting boundaries becomes their way of reclaiming peace, protecting their mental health, and signaling that something in the relationship is deeply out of balance. The subtle yet firm shift can feel like rejection, but for the INFJ, it's survival. They've learned the hard way that if they don't guard their energy, they'll end up emotionally depleted. And once they begin enforcing these limits, it's often a sign they're preparing to distance themselves further. For the person on the receiving end, these boundaries can be confusing. You may feel like the INFJ changed suddenly, when in reality, the change has been building over time. Their patience has been stretched, their trust eroded, and now they've decided they won't compromise their well-being any longer. In many cases, these boundaries are the final stage before complete detachment. If you respect them, there's a chance to rebuild trust. But if you ignore or push against them, you're likely to accelerate the INFJ's silent cutoff, one that, once complete, is almost always permanent. They disappear without explanation, the final goodbye. When an INFJ reaches their breaking point, the ultimate sign that you've hurt them, often without even realizing it, is their sudden disappearance. Unlike others who might argue, demand closure, or stage dramatic exits, INFJs simply vanish. They don't shout, they don't explain, and they don't leave long messages behind. They quietly remove themselves, and by the time you notice, the bond has already been severed. This disappearance isn't impulsive, it's the result of countless internal battles, silent observations, and emotional calculations. INFJs rarely walk away without giving chance after chance, but once they decide enough is enough, they choose peace over conflict. To them, silence says what words never could, that their energy is no longer available, that the connection is no longer safe, and that their soul deserves protection. What makes this so unsettling is the lack of explanation. You're left replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to understand what triggered the sudden cutoff. This is exactly why INFJ disappearances haunt people for years, because they leave behind a void filled with unanswered questions. For the INFJ, however, this disappearance is not punishment, it's survival. They know that arguing would only drain them further, and explaining themselves to someone who never listened would be pointless. Instead, they choose the cleanest break possible, silence. And while it feels cold from the outside, for them, it's an act of reclaiming their power. In relationships, friendships, or family ties, this stage is almost always permanent. When an INFJ walks away without explanation, it means trust has been broken beyond repair. They won't return to rehash old wounds, and they won't offer closure to soothe your guilt. Their absence is the closure. And that's the brutal truth. When an INFJ disappears, it's not a phase, it's an ending. They may wish you well from a distance, but they've already chosen themselves, and once they do, they never look back. And there you have it, the 10 silent signs that an INFJ is quietly pulling away. If you've ever felt one of these shifts in someone close to you, chances are it wasn't random. It was their way of protecting themselves. What many people fail to understand is that INFJs rarely leave loudly. They leave silently, and once they do, it's final. But here's the bigger truth. If you recognize these signs early, you might still have a chance to repair the bond, but only if you respect their boundaries and listen deeply. Because once the INFJ decides the connection is beyond saving, no amount of chasing, begging, or apologizing will bring them back. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these signs do you think is the hardest to recognize before it's too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Brainy 1, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new deep dive into the INFJ mind. Because the truth is, understanding an INFJ is rare, but once you do, you'll never see them the same way again.